Hi, everyone. We're so happy to be here. Rob Kissner and I, Danny Potocki. We'll formally introduce ourselves in a second, but we're so happy to be at the Rutgers Online Learning Conference for 2026. A special thank you to Justin Smith and his teammates for welcoming us. Cheers to all the good work you all are doing, and all the best to all of our colleagues and peers who are presenting at the conference on Monday. So we want to welcome you to Operational Learning, the next era of entrepreneurship education. I'm Danny Potocki. I'm a visiting lecturer and have been an entrepreneur in residence, the School of Business at State University of New York at New Paltz, or also known as SUNY New Paltz. Rob, over to you just for a quick intro.
Sure. I'm Rob Kissner. I'm a former business owner and now educator with the Heinz Institute for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Iona University.
Great. And Rob and I have done lots of work together. We've collaborated on many things, and also Rob in the past have operated on the ground, many of our ventures and entrepreneurial initiatives. So we try to bring today a perspective of the operator mindset, but also the educator mindset to pair these together. And we'll talk about it obviously a little bit more, but this is something we've been playing with called operational learning for the benefit of the students. Entrepreneurship education has made great strides in building mindset and creative thinking. But we also want to bring up what might be a critical gap or an emerging gap that remains between this inspiration of mindset and real world readiness with this operations in the learning atmosphere. So today's session is grounded really in research data, a little bit of theory, but also the operations about what students and graduates and working entrepreneurs, what they say is missing from the classroom that we think, we could bring to bear and work together to create the operational learning framework. All right, so Rob, over to you to review a little bit more of what we're doing today.
So for today, we're going to cover four major sections. We're going to cover the current state of entrepreneurship education. As Danny mentioned, it's rooted in mindset, and we're going to discuss that to sort of establish the basis and share some data about how there may be some gaps in entrepreneurial learning when we think about shifting from the university setting to operationally creating a business or operationalizing a business. We'll introduce our framework for operational learning, and then we'll give you some practical examples of how you might think about introducing this into your coursework. So, I've been teaching entrepreneurship since 2018, and particularly at my institute. But I've attended USASB and GCEC and many of the entrepreneurship education conferences, and I think anybody that's been there can relate to this idea about focusing on mindset. I think this is a really powerful way to approach entrepreneurship education. I've experienced transformations with my students who have felt sort of apathetic about their attendance in college and not really sure what to do, and rooting some education in entrepreneurial mindset, the idea about being creative when approaching problems, taking agency over one's direction in life, both personally and professionally, is a really transformational experience for students. With the education based on entrepreneurial mindset, we have a strong root in theory and practice a lot of the entrepreneurial skills through simulations. They may go out and interview a couple of customers and then put together an empathy map to develop their product development, but it doesn't quite give students the opportunity to operationalize these skills in a real world setting, and that's really sort of the gap that we're trying to approach here today.
Okay, so let's dive into it. This is a metric at 7% of career rate in entrepreneurship that has been discussed, in circles within entrepreneurship education, but also on a national scale when we look across the board of degrees in entrepreneurship and what results might look like or transition to the marketplace and career might look like. So to summarize, 7% of students who graduate with an entrepreneurship degree, we could extend that to a certificate or other forms of that education, pursue a career in entrepreneurship. Okay, so we do a quick hold on this, quick stop, and we recognize things like building a venture and succeeding at that venture is already difficult, right? That 1 in 10 are going to be successful in building a new venture. But this stat also talks to the amount of degree holders in entrepreneurship education that even attempt to try to build a venture in what they studied and what they want to apply. So I think there's a couple things that we should dive into this this landscape of what's actually happening and what students are thinking when they're pursuing an entrepreneurship degree. So today we are not disagreeing with everything that Rob has established already. Growth mindset, right? Design thinking, systems thinking, and many, many other types of methodologies and tools and resources. What we're trying to do here is extend the classroom pedagogy into operations and what that looks like. And we want to present and talk about some data in order to inform and influence a result greater than 7%. We think there's a big opportunity to go beyond mindset, beyond design thinking, to the operations on the ground and model that in the classroom. So on to the next slide where we talk about what this research design looked like. So up front, one thing that's very important is this was student faculty-led grant-funded research. So it was done hand in hand with undergraduate and graduate students that at every step of the way have been part of this. So, as colleagues and peers, we want to make sure that everyone knows what our research design was, how we engaged audiences, how we engaged students, specifically undergraduates and graduate students, and also on the other side of this, how we engage professional entrepreneurs. That essentially means someone that was um, have launched the venture, whether they have had a degree or not, and whether they've had a degree in entrepreneurship or not. However, most have not had a degree in entrepreneurship because, Rob, as you know well, this has been an emergence of a degree and certificate and programs with curricula and co-curricular offerings that at the time, many of the entrepreneurs that we studied, that wasn't an option. So having talked about that, just a couple more quick points on this, that the research was designed to compare three distinct populations that I mentioned, that were the students in two types of students and the working entrepreneurs, so that we in hopes could identify exactly where the readiness gap, right, like in our intro, what the readiness gap looks like for operational learning. There were these dimensions that we studied across the board. You see them here, the drive, the money management, the customer, the organizational skills, etc. And we thought, that a Likert scale across the board gave us a nuanced, beyond simple yes or no responses, letting us see where students feel partially prepared, fully prepared, etc., which is often more revealing, we think, than other ways of collecting these insights. So let's talk about some key findings and what was brought to bear, at least in continuation of this research, and how we began to think about how this might translate to pedagogy, curricula, in classroom, outside of classroom, and beyond. So there's a couple things, just to review, and so everyone's on the same page. We think one of the most striking headlines, 63% of professional entrepreneurs never took an entrepreneurship course. Okay, we qualified that also by some of them that we studied. It wasn't an option. So it's amazing that it is an option now. It's completely amazing that we are teaching entrepreneurial learning and mindset and systems thinking. But Rob and I and some other group of colleagues are trying to think about entrepreneur thinking, which we think is more connected to operations on the ground and not just the mindset, even though any graduate that goes to a corporate or a nonprofit or a hospital or other places is going to be fully enriched with this entrepreneurial thinking. So how do we fill this gap knowing that the entrepreneurs who never took, what does that look like, with the students themselves? So we did identify that one experience gap when comparing the professionals and the students was a clear difference between the amount of internships, opportunities, co-ops, or jobs. For example, professionals, entrepreneurs have had 5 to 10 jobs. So they had, even though they didn't have the option of the entrepreneurial growth mindset coursework, they were gaining experience through more internships, more jobs, more projects, maybe more side hustles, and we're learning the elements of what now we know to be entrepreneurial thinking in different ways. Whereas most students, at least that were asked and surveyed and engaged, are reporting as low as 0 to 2 experiences. So yes, they are getting degree-based, certificate-based through the entrepreneurship curricula and co-curricular, but we we all know, I think there's more good work to do in terms of internships, co-ops, market matching, and other ways to do that. And then also, we just want to highlight that the curriculum, holes, if we were to talk about it that way, identified specific areas that both the students have requested beyond the existing curricula and confirmed actually 4 out of 5 categories that were the top categories were almost literally word by word confirmed by the professional entrepreneurs, which we think is very compelling to say, okay, we might have a start here of an operational learning curriculum that we can embed in degree and certificate. And that is, just to name them, money management, uh, the go-to-market strategy, which we are calling sales management, the team management, and the customer service components of this. We think all of this, once again, just to restate that, could be operational learning, meaning on the ground entrepreneur operations. Now imagine pairing that with the growth mindset and the entrepreneurial thinking. Wow, that would be amazing skills that on day one, we think students would hit the ground running even more. So now let's summarize, finally sort of on slide 7, what operational learning looks like, feels like, tastes like, it's defined as, at least as of start. We would love lots of feedback and insights on this. We could talk about definition because it would clearly inform any instructor, organizational design, curriculum design, lesson plans, etc. So we could have follow-up summits on this. So operational learning, we think, is learning that happens through doing, deciding, and then adapting in real time, not in preparation for someday doing it. Now, we're not critiquing the someday in the future. We're also not critiquing adapting in real time relative to things like growth mindset, systems thinking, design thinking. That iterative, agile development is completely a resource tool and foundation to make this happen. But now, if we're using a forcing function, for example, that action first on, okay, you're the executive, you have to make a decision right now. You just lost your largest client on a Friday, which is something that really happened when I helped run a business. Do you fire X amount of people on Monday or not? So imagine simulating and going through that real experience and then bringing in entrepreneurs who are operating to talk about those decisions themselves, and then reading The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz on a chapter on how to fire someone from a business. Now, relative, that is only one small sample of what we're talking about, but we're trying to get to action first, iterative by design to keep growth mindset completely embedded in this. And then the context of sector, industry, market, teams, people, what the landscape of uncertainty looks like. So we'd like to propose this as a starting definition per se, and we do have some drafted curricula that we can always, share and in follow-ups. Rob, over to you for a little bit more on the application and the implementation of what a framework looks like.
So, this is sort of our working framework for how we're thinking about operational learning, and we've got some practical examples of how this can be put in practice in the classroom or out of the classroom in co-curricular programming in a bit. But really, we want to maintain the entrepreneurial mindset education. We want to empower students who may not consider themselves to be entrepreneurs. However, in the hopes to operationalize those skills immediately, we're looking at this 5-step framework. So we would really start with establishing a skill. That might be record keeping. That might be managing the team with, HR records or something like that. It could be something really granular, or it could be something much larger, like stakeholder engagement as you're preparing to get into product development. But we'll learn the skill in the classroom in sort of the safe setting to develop those. And of course, ground that in theory. That's really justifying why we're doing this. I think that's really important with the population of students we have these days. There needs to be justification as why they're learning this. Otherwise, the interest and engagement isn't just naturally there. So we learn the skill, ground it in theory to really establish why, and then we go out and do it. And when I say do it, we're not going to do that through like a gamified experience or a hypothetical in the classroom. We're getting out and we're interacting with real customers. We're engaging with real stakeholders. We're talking to real business owners. We're talking to real, government employees or nonprofit workers and those kinds of things to introduce the variability of the real world. Like students need to practice these skills under pressure. It's great to say, if this happens, then we'll do this in the classroom. But when you're actually talking to another person who's experiencing a problem in real time, it's an entirely different experience. And then on the assessment part of this, our point of view is we don't need to really assess how successful the outcome is. In building these operational skills, we need to assess that they've applied the skills. We're really focusing on assessing the process, right? And we'll talk about what that means practically in a little bit. But finally, we want to include some reflection and metacognition in this. Like, how did it work? How do these skills align with my professional goals, my entrepreneurial goals? Like, how does this fit into my entrepreneurial identity? We want to always bring this sort of like metacognitive experience and reflection at the end. So it's really not all that different from the things that we've been doing. I mean, if anybody's been using the design thinking framework, this is fairly similar. It's this iterative process, but I think steps 3 and 4 provide something a little bit more novel, the idea of applying this in the real world under real constraints and not focusing so much on the success of the outcome, but that the process was implemented in a way that provided a educational experience and a chance to really operationalize these skills. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of ways that we do this. And I think one of the best is a class that we offer at Iona through the Heinz Institute, which is a pop-up social enterprise class. And so the way that this works is students at the beginning of the semester, we talk about what social entrepreneurship and social enterprise is. We look at some great case studies, some of the major players like Patagonia. And then we invest some time in exploring the UN SDGs. We do some experiences where students sort of figure out what's important to them as an entrepreneur. If they're going to be going through the process of creating a venture, what would they want to do to support the world through the lens of the UN SDGs. And we do some cool teaming exercises around identifying those. And when we get into the real meat and potatoes of this course, once we identify an SDG, we go through the process of identifying and vetting a nonprofit partner who we want to benefit through our entrepreneurial activities, which is a great experience in itself. We get their, 990 records from the IRS and do like a analysis of their annual report to really see what impact they're having on this particular social issue, which is a great experience in itself. But really, we give each student team $100 of startup capital. With that money, they create a product or service of their choice to run both on and off campus. Over the course of 4 to 5 weeks, students go out in the world and run their business. And at the end, we take 100% of the profit that we generate and donate it to this nonprofit that we've identified. And the way that we're doing this is, financial performance is a key aspect of their assessment. So the team that earns the most sort of sets the A for that part of their grade. But I'm assessing them on their process. Are they submitting their inventory reports, their financial reports, and their HR reports, who was where, selling what, and who was responsible for what, and are they keeping track of those hours correctly every week? I'm assessing them on operationalizing their entrepreneurial skills. Like, are they running this business according to the skills that we've developed in the class? And in addition to that, because we've identified a UN SDG that the entire class cares about, there's motivation to do well. I mean, in my current section of this class, there's some pretty fierce competition amongst the teams of who's going to be the top earner. And it's a really, really fun and real experience being out in the world and actually making sales, collecting donations, and having to keep track of hard currency. So this is a really, really great example to operationalize those entrepreneurial skills. Another great example of this is the Intro to Design Thinking and Ideation class that we run at the Heinz Institute. And so we've been running this class. This is actually the first class I ever taught with Iona, and we've been running this class since our inception. But it's evolved a little bit, and we do a project called City Labs, which is in partner with some community organizations. And each semester, rather than applying the design thinking to a hypothetical problem or a problem that is stemmed from the students' own experiences, we get paired with a local municipality, and we set up some frameworks of a community problem that the students have to go and engage with and present a sustainable solution for. And so what's great about this is we, learn the design thinking process. We practice that in class in sort of a safe, low risk environment. But then they need to go out in the community and they need to talk to real people that experience real problems and people who have real emotions. And that comes through in the stakeholder engagement. And, in addition to the actual design thinking frameworks, there's a lot of logistical problems of, not all the stakeholders can meet us during the class time. So students have to coordinate schedules and transportation and all of these other operational skills to get out in the community and engage with stakeholders. And not only that, they involve the stakeholders in the design of their solution. So they really become part of the product development. And at the end, we have a really nice presentation, usually with the mayor of the municipality that we're working with, and the stakeholders involved come through. So it makes all of the work real. It's great to learn the design thinking framework and apply that through the lens of the students' own perspectives. But design thinking is all about understanding people. It's human-centered design. And this type of experience allows the students to operationalize this skill in a really unique and very transformational way. And both of those examples are kind of big lifts. There's a fair bit of like logistical work that goes in, and obviously with the first example, there's some budget involved with getting the students the money and how that works. So it can be a little complicated to implement that. This is sort of a really small, actionable, simple example, which is bringing in a local business owner to discuss with the class a problem that they're experiencing in their business and doing sort of like a lightning round problem solving experience where in teams they have to brainstorm a solution to that problem, present it to the partner, and the partner can sort of evaluate how realistic and sustainable that is for them. And this takes place over maybe 1 or 2 sessions depending on how your schedule works. But again, having that real outside perspective, somebody who's experiencing real issues, has some skin in the game, and somebody who will be real about whether the ideas are good or not or actually solve the problem or not, does give, at a very micro level, the opportunity for students to operationalize some of these skills. And so, in terms of implementing this, I think the first and most important thing is to really identify the goals for your course that you want to operationalize, right? In the amount of time we have in a given semester, we can't operationalize everything about the entrepreneurial process, right? So really identify what it is you want. For the design thinking class, it's really all about stakeholder engagement. We want to get students out in the community, talking to real people and experiencing real problems. For the social enterprise class, I'm really focused on operations of their pop-up, reporting and managing money and all of those kinds of things. Those are my goals. So really identify those goals and then start with a small way to get those out in the real world, out of the classroom and out in the real world, out of the vacuum and out in a real space where things ebb and flow and there's real variables and things are not so A to Z, right? And built in iteration. It's not going to go well the first time. You're always going to be experimenting with that. And quite honestly, you can involve your students in helping you figure this out, right? Like, we're going to experiment with something this year, and at the end of the semester, I want to debrief with you to figure out how we can improve this process. Assessment is going to change, right? We're not so much assessing the outcomes, we're assessing the process and how it aligns with those goals that you established in the beginning. And also, it really helps to establish some great partnerships, whether that's through your alumni or through community organizations, but establishing those partnerships makes the logistics of getting students out of the classroom and into the real world much more effective.
Thank you, Rob, for a ton of that. A lot of insight, a lot to continue to explore together. So just some final thoughts, as we end and settle up here. Entrepreneurship education, we know and we believe has made great strides in building mindset and creative thinking, systems thinking, and many, many other areas of learning. But operational learning can or will, we think too, fill a gap that remains between these forms of inspiration and thinking with real world readiness and decision making. So the key distinction that I think we're presenting in this framework is that learning isn't preparation for someday doing only, based on previous with design thinking and whatnot. It is the actual doing. It's the operations. It's happening in real time with real consequences. And we believe and know that that can happen also in the classroom, in co-curricular settings and beyond, as Rob so, genuinely highlighted. This shift may be the most important change when you grade decision quality and adaptability rather than just as we've presented final output. You change also how the students are practicing, how they're reflecting, and what they're valuing in their education. We still have areas, of course, to think through and study in service to our students. For example, student rank, as operational learning is not reserved for advanced students. It's a design principle that scales across disciplines, course levels, institutional contexts, and also grading, for example. Rob and I have talked a ton about what grading looks like and how it acts, how to set expectations with students, how to work with colleagues also and other faculty because operational learning prioritizes, to be clear, action first, which is introduces real-time failure and incentivizes decision making, like we've talked about. But the good news is that this type of grading is also paired with proven pedagogy, such as reflective learning and other assignments that Rob has mentioned, and we think, has shown, wisely in his samples. So we thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have shared this with you. We believe there are many opportunities to explore and potentially collaborate together. We think this is a start of some sort of grouping in entrepreneurship education. And again, we thank Rutgers and the team for welcoming us, and we wish you all the best in your development. Just as a close, you can contact me, Danny, at patockid@newpaltz.edu, and also Rob at rkissner@iona.edu. So thank you to everyone, and be well.
Thanks, everybody.